The private dining suite on the 47th floor was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerated vault behind the glass wall. It housed the object of the night's negotiation, a 300-year-old illuminated charter said to confirm ancestral land rights worth over $240 million. The sheikh, wrapped in immaculate linen and authority, sat at the head of the obsidian table. His pen, platinum, heavy, custom, waited beside an untouched crystal carafe. He didn't look up when she stepped in. She was only there to refill the glasses. A waitress hired by the hotel because she moved quietly and spoke to no one. Her name would not appear on the staff roster until the following month. Bureaucratic delay, they had said. Invisibility suited her. It kept questions away. But the sheikh noticed her only to dismiss her. He addressed her in a clipped Gulf dialect, a tone sharpened for servants. A test disguised as a command. A sentence whose grammar twisted like barbed wire, designed to trip anyone pretending to understand advanced speech. She placed the carafe down with steady hands. Then she answered him, calmly, precisely, in flawless classical Arabic, her posture still deferential, her voice low enough to preserve his pride, yet unmistakably authoritative in its purity. It was the dialect scholars guarded like a relic, the register that revealed education, lineage, and the kind of hidden intelligence that unsettled powerful men. The entire table froze. Even the consultants brought to authenticate the charter paused mid-breath. For the first time that evening, the sheikh lifted his eyes fully to her face. And something shifted. Not respect yet, but the first crack in his certainty that he controlled the room. He stared at her walking away, unable to understand how he had missed someone like her. She felt their eyes scraping across her back as she retreated toward the service alcove, the air thick with the kind of silence that tilts a room off its axis. She moved the way she always did when attention threatened to find her, chin lowered, motions economical. The practiced invisibility of someone who had spent years trying not to occupy space she couldn't afford. Behind her, the consultants murmured in low tones. She could hear only fragments. Unexpected. Native level. Who is she? The sheikh's voice cut through their whispers like a blade, a harsh reprimand delivered in that same commanding dialect. But even through the door, she recognized the strain beneath it. He was unsettled. She leaned against the cool metal counter, letting the moment drain out of her. She hated when people noticed. Recognition brought questions. Questions led to paperwork. Paperwork exposed the truth. She couldn't afford exposure. The hotel paid her in cash while her immigration case crawled through courts that forgot she existed. Her degree, a near-completed PhD in philology before everything collapsed, was buried under debt, illness, and the kind of bureaucratic cruelty that never makes the news. She was brilliant in fields where brilliance was worthless without a sponsor. Linguistic nuance, historical syntax, forensic semantics. She had once been able to live inside them. Now she lived inside a storage room between shifts, stitching together a life out of compromises. Tonight had been simple. Pour water, remove plates, stay silent. The negotiation in the suite was far above her world, orbiting an object she had only glimpsed through the glass wall. A vellum charter trimmed with gold leaf, its script shimmering like metal under the refrigeration lights. A document that old carried danger. She knew because she had studied forgeries crafted to survive centuries. But this wasn't her problem. She wasn't part of the meeting. She was just the help. Still, when the manager found her, breathless, apologetic, her heart sank. "The sheikh wants you to stay," he whispered. "He insists." She opened her mouth to refuse, but the words locked in her throat. Refusal could cost her the job, maybe the fragile stability she'd built. Powerful men didn't like being surprised, and this one seemed determined to reassert control. So she followed the manager back into the suite. The lights had dimmed slightly by the time she returned, giving the room a cinematic weight. every shadow carefully arranged. The sheikh didn't look at her this time. He merely gestured to a corner near the wall, the place where servants stood when they were meant to be present but irrelevant. She went. And as she stood there, hands clasped, spine straight, something inside her whispered that the night had shifted in ways she wasn't ready for. Power notices what threatens it. No one escapes a room unchanged once they've been truly seen. She stood in the dim corner, the way a ghost might occupy a half-forgotten corridor, visible only if someone looked too long. The consultants resumed their evaluation of the charter, their voices blending into a polite, expensive hum. She kept her gaze lowered, but she couldn't help listening. Words were her compass. Even in silence, she navigated by their edges. An impeccable specimen, one expert announced, adjusting his glasses as though the gesture could summon certainty. Another nodded, almost theatrically. Pristine vellum, no warping, pigment untouched. She winced inwardly. Vellum that old should warp. Pigments that vibrant should dull. Languages that survived empires should carry scars. But she said nothing. Her job tonight was to be furniture with a pulse. Her life had trained her for this, erasing herself before anyone else had the chance. After her academic collapse, she'd learned how quickly institutions forgot the gifted. How easily a woman's mind could be dismissed as over-specialized, not strategic, or simply not the right fit. She had fled the country where she once lectured, leaving behind a mentor who betrayed her trust and an administrative system that pushed her into financial ruin. And the irony was cruel. The very skills that had devoured her youth, paleography, root pattern syntax, the archaeology of ink, were the ones now keeping her hidden in a hotel uniform with a broken zipper. A consultant lifted the charter's protective casing as though unveiling a relic to an obedient congregation. The refrigeration lights traced the gold leaf, making it shimmer unnaturally. Too vibrant, she thought. Too recent. But she breathed slowly, controlling the impulse to analyze. She was done interfering with worlds that punished her curiosity. Then the sheikh spoke. "Prepare the signing documents," he said, his voice flat, heavy with confidence meant to overwhelm doubt. He tapped the platinum pen on the table, a ritual of dominance. The sound echoed like a countdown. Her pulse throbbed. Her eyes drifted again to the charter, unable to resist. Something in its structure bothered her. Not a flaw exactly, but a tension, like a violin string tuned too tightly. A shape in the lettering that leaned wrong, a margin too generous, a spacing pattern she recognized from forgeries designed to simulate pre-modern calligraphic discipline. Her throat tightened. One consultant cleared his throat and declared, "There is no anomaly. We confirm full authenticity." She knew the rhythm of fraud when it approached its crescendo. Too smooth, too unanimous, too rehearsed. The sheikh's pen hovered over the contract, waiting only for the final presentation. She closed her eyes briefly. Sometimes survival demanded silence. Sometimes silence demanded courage. The head consultant dimmed the overhead lights further, creating a theatrical halo around the charter. It was a performance. She recognized the choreography instantly. Academics pretending to be priests, wealth pretending to be certainty, and all of it orbiting around a document cooling behind glass like a sleeping predator. "Your Highness," the lead expert said, "allow me to walk you through the provenance." She watched him glide to the display case with the confidence of a man who had never been questioned. His suit was impeccable, but his footwork betrayed nerves. Too quick, too exact. He pressed a button and the glass case eased open with a hiss. A faint pulse of refrigerated air slipped across the room. She couldn't help it. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction. Vellum reacts to temperature changes. It expands, contracts, breathes. But the sheet before them remained unnaturally flat, too obedient under changing conditions. Almost polymer-like. The consultant launched into an elegant monologue about lineage and estate transitions, tracing a tale of custodianship across 3 centuries. She had heard similar stories during her doctoral research. History always sounded cleanest when told by people who never touched the dust. From her corner, she studied the margins again. The script shimmered with a subtle metallic vibration that didn't belong to iron gall ink. Iron gall ages unevenly, brittle at the edges, cracked along pressure points. But here, every stroke was smooth, symmetrical, untouched by time. Still, she stayed motionless. The sheikh leaned back, absorbing the expert's words with a practiced calm. He radiated the composure of someone used to being the richest person in any room, someone convinced that expertise could be purchased like rare perfume, measured, packaged, guaranteed. But she sensed something else beneath his posture tonight, the faint fragility of a man who desperately needed this document to be real. His family's claim to the disputed land had been challenged for years, and this charter was his chance to silence rivals and secure a legacy. A $240 million legacy. Another consultant, younger, eager to impress, began projecting digital scans onto a screen. He zoomed in dramatically, highlighting the authentic microabrasions, the age-consistent pigment separation, the archival stitching marks. The room nodded along, lulled by the vocabulary of certainty. But the stitching marks were wrong, too symmetrical, too consistent, machine precision masquerading as human imperfection. Her heartbeat drummed behind her ribs. She told herself to stop, to turn away, to remember the fragility of her immigration case, the paychecks she relied on, the life she couldn't afford to shatter. But the charter wouldn't let her look elsewhere. It pulled at her like an unresolved chord, dissonant, demanding. The sheikh extended his hand toward the contract folder, ready to begin the signing ceremony. She swallowed hard. Sometimes a truth refuses to stay silent, even inside the person most desperate to hide. The contract folder slid across the obsidian table with a soft whisper, the kind that feels louder than footsteps in a cathedral. The sheikh opened it with deliberate calm, each movement controlled, almost ceremonial. Wealth often expressed itself through slowness. Only the rushed feared losing something. She watched him remove the signing page, its cream surface glowing under the pendant lights. A second consultant, older, silver hair slicked back, stepped forward to narrate the historical clauses. His tone was reverent, as if reading scripture. She knew that tone. It was designed to anesthetize thought. As you can see, he said smoothly, the charter predates the land dispute by more than 2 centuries. Its authenticity positions Your Highness as the sole legitimate heir. Her breath caught. That was the trap. If the charter was forged, and the sheikh signed documents invoking its legitimacy, he wouldn't just risk buying a fake artifact. He would be binding himself to legal claims dependent on a fraudulent foundation. And in land disputes of this magnitude, proving reliance on a forged document could flip liability entirely. It could bankrupt him. She felt heat gather in her chest, fear, frustration, the old ghosts of academic rooms where she wasn't allowed to speak because she was too young, too female, too foreign. Yet she saw it all more clearly than any of the men performing authenticity tonight. Still, she stayed in the corner. The younger consultant displayed a magnified image of the charter's seal. Observe the natural oxidation around the edges, he said proudly. Impossible to replicate. Impossible? No. It was one of the easiest things to replicate, if you understood how pre-modern ferric compounds reacted when reheated and rapidly cooled. Her fingers curled into her palm. The sheikh was now tracing the signature line with the tip of his platinum pen, his expression composed but brittle, like ice holding too much weight. She had seen men like him before. Powerful, intimidating but consumed by the need to prove themselves infallible. He looked at the charter again, and she noticed it, the smallest flicker of doubt crossing his face. A shadow, quick but real. The consultants sensed it too. Their voices sharpened, growing more insistent, more polished. One of them stepped closer. "I assure you, Your Highness, our verification is conclusive. There is no anomaly." No anomaly. The phrase echoed through her like a fault line. Behind them, the refrigeration lights buzzed faintly. The gold leaf shimmered, not with age, but with the unsettling perfection of something recently made and trying very hard not to be noticed. Her chest tightened. She knew this feeling. The quiet before a collapse, and yet she stood in silence, hands clasped, invisible. The world changes only when one person decides they cannot ignore what they know. The room's temperature felt colder now, though no one had touched the controls. It was the kind of cold that didn't come from air vents. It came from the slow realization that something was wrong. The kind of wrong that hid behind polished surfaces and expert assurances. The sheikh leaned over the charter once more, studying it with the earnest concentration of a man trying to read fate in ink. His advisors hovered like orbiting satellites, each ready to intercept doubt before it found a voice. She remained in the corner, posture straight, breath steady. But inside, her mind moved with forensic precision, reconstructing every anomaly she had observed. The vellum, too uniform. The pigments, too saturated. The stitching, too symmetrical. The seal, too cooperative with the light. Authentic antiquity was uneven. It resisted perfection. She had spent nearly 8 years examining manuscripts that confessed their age through their flaws. But this document offered no confession, only performance. One consultant launched into a lecture on the charter's unique calligraphic lineage, tracing its supposed origins to a scribe known for distinctive flourishes. She almost laughed. The flourish he pointed to was a modern reconstruction, one she recognized from a digitized manuscript commonly reused in high-end forgeries. A cheap shortcut inside a $240 million transaction. But the sheikh didn't notice. His gaze swept across the document with the vulnerability of someone who needed it to be authentic. She could almost feel the weight on him. The political pressure, the generational expectations, the silent war with rival families waiting for him to stumble. She could also feel the trap tightening. If he signed tonight, everything that followed, lawsuits, land seizures, public scrutiny, would hinge on the charter's legitimacy. If the forgery was later exposed, the legal consequences would flip violently against him. Even if he won, he'd lose. She inhaled slowly. She knew this type of scam intimately. It preyed on powerful men who believed they were too rich to be deceived. A faint tremor ran through her hand. She pulled her fingers together to hide it. The head consultant lifted the charter carefully, tilting it under the lights. "Observe," he said softly, "the breathtaking continuity of a stroke width. Only a master scribe could achieve such consistency." Her stomach dropped. Continuity of stroke width was the tell. Natural ink flow narrows as the quill depletes. Machine-applied pigment does not. She pressed her tongue to the roof of her mouth, grounding herself. The walls seemed to fold inward, compressing her thoughts into a single, unbearable truth. If she stayed silent, he would sign. If he signed, he would fall. And she would watch a preventable disaster unfold inches from her hands. The sheikh raised the pen. A hush spread across the room, heavy and anticipatory. Every collapse begins with a moment when someone could have spoken. The sheikh poised his pen above the contract, the metal tip catching a thin line of light that sliced across the table like a warning. The room braced itself. Consultants stilled. Assistants held their breath. Even the refrigeration unit behind the glass seemed to quiet, as if technology itself sensed the impending mistake. She could feel her pulse in her throat. He was seconds away from binding himself to a fraud so sophisticated it had seduced an entire panel of experts. But sophistication was often just confidence in disguise. She had learned that during her academic collapse, when prestigious scholars dismissed her research because her warnings threatened their reputations. And here it was again. A room full of powerful men polishing fiction into fact. She kept her eyes on the charter, studying it with the stillness of a hunter. A single word at the top of the script pulled her attention, a land term used in 18th century maritime decrees. Correct term, wrong pattern. The scribe had placed it with the spacing rule from a much later century, one introduced after ink reformations altered script curvature. A tiny historical fracture. A whisper only specialists would hear. But the whisper felt like thunder inside her. Another consultant stepped forward, desperate to seal the moment before doubt resurfaced. "Your Highness," he said, "I recommend signing now. The estate transfer window closes at midnight." Pressure disguised as urgency. Urgency disguised as legitimacy. She shifted her weight, a small movement, but it awakened something in her chest, an old instinct from the university archives where she once lived among forgotten manuscripts. She remembered how it felt to stand before panels of men who pretended not to hear her warnings. She remembered the humiliation of being silenced by degrees she didn't have the money to complete. The sheikh lowered the pen slightly, eyes flicking to the experts, not for approval, but for reassurance. That was the moment she recognized. He wasn't arrogant tonight. He was afraid. A man who ruled entire districts was terrified of appearing foolish in front of scholars he paid to guide him. For the first time, she pitied him. She scanned the charter again. Her mind constructed possibilities at lightning speed. The forged vellum treated with synthetic pressure aging, the metallic pigments simulating iron gall bite, the calligraphic consistency too perfect for human handwork. She could explain all of it. She could expose it. She could save him. But revealing her knowledge meant stepping out of the shadows she relied on to survive. If she spoke, everything she hid, her immigration status, her unfinished dissertation, her fragile life woven through temporary jobs, might unravel. If she stayed silent, he would sign a contract engineered to destroy him. The sheikh lifted his pen again, inhaling to steady himself. Her heartbeat hammered a single conclusion. Silence is also a choice, one that history never forgives. The pen hovered again, closer this time, its shadow trembling across the signature line. The consultants leaned in subtly, forming a human barrier between the sheikh and any remaining instinct he might have had to pause. Their choreography was too smooth, too perfectly timed. They weren't guiding him. They were herding him. That was when she noticed something new. Not on the charter, on the contract. A clause printed in small serif type near the bottom of the page. She knew enough legal language to sense danger long before she understood its full shape. The phrasing tugged at her memory like a half-remembered melody. Assumption of historical liability under claimant origin. Her breath froze. It was a reversal clause. Plainly put, if the charter was ever challenged or proven altered, the sheikh wouldn't just lose the land claim. He would legally assume responsibility for damages caused by the dispute itself. Historical damages. Centuries of contested claims. The financial impact wouldn't stop at $240 million. It could spiral far beyond it. A trap. Elegant, hidden in plain sight. Her fingertips tingled. The room seemed to tilt, slow and heavy, as though time thickened to force her into a decision. She closed her eyes for a moment, recalling the night she left academia. The humiliation of presenting her research to a panel that smiled as they ignored her warnings about forged maritime texts. She had watched a professor, one who once praised her brilliance, explain her findings back to her, as if they were his own. That was the night she stopped speaking. But the ache in her ribs tonight wasn't fear. It was recognition. The same type of forgery. The same linguistic fingerprints. The same arrogance. She opened her eyes again. A consultant stepped behind the sheikh, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "Everything is in order, Your Highness. You may proceed." Her pulse spiked. The refrigeration lights flickered softly against the gold leaf on the charter. The shimmer was too sharp, too reflective for an artifact of its age. The metallic pigment caught the light like fresh paint still eager to prove itself. Every forensic alarm inside her ignited at once. Too perfect, too young, too symmetrical, too compliant. She felt her breath deepen, not out of panic, but out of inevitability. She could no longer pretend she didn't know what she knew. Knowledge had weight, and hers was crushing. The sheikh lowered the pen toward the page. And that was when she finally saw the first real anomaly, a hairline misplacement in the ascender of a crucial letter, one that no 18th century scribe would ever form that way. A microscopic curve shaped by modern calligraphic software templates. Her decision crystallized in an instant. She stepped forward. Barely a movement, but enough to shift the air. History pivots on small steps that refuse to stay quiet. The shift of her weight, a single quiet step, was enough to fracture the room's equilibrium. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it cut through the ceremony like a blade slipping under silk. The sheikh froze mid-stroke. The consultants turned, irritation flickering across their faces. No one spoke at first. They were too stunned that she had moved at all. She felt the heat of their confusion before she felt their anger. "Remain where you are," one consultant snapped, his tone dripping condescension. He used the same clipped Gulf dialect the sheikh had used earlier, weaponized politeness, barely masking contempt. But she didn't step back. Her voice came out low, steady, and devastatingly articulate. "Your Highness, there is an anomaly." The sentence detonated in the room. Silence rippled outward like shockwaves hitting glass. Consultant stiffened. An assistant nearly dropped a tablet. The sheikh turned slowly toward her, his expression unreadable, as if trying to understand which law of the universe she had just violated. She held her breath, waiting for the reprimand, the dismissal, the humiliation. She had survived those things before. She could survive them again. But this time, she didn't back down. "The charter," she said softly, "carries a structural inconsistency in its primary script." The consultants erupted instantly. "You are out of line." "She has no standing here. Security should remove her." Their voices overlapped, frantic, aggressive, terrified. Fraud fears men who see too much. The sheikh raised one hand. The room collapsed into silence. "Explain," he said. Not a command. A request. Her pulse thundered. She stepped closer to the table, careful, respectful, but with the presence of someone who finally accepted she could no longer watch history break itself. Her gaze swept the charter. "The curvature of the ascender on this letter," she said, pointing without touching, "is shaped by a modern template. 18th century scribes followed a natural quill pressure curve. This one follows software symmetry, mathematically perfect, historically impossible." The younger consultant barked, "Absurd! She's misquoted a detail she doesn't understand." But the sheikh's eyes were locked on her. She continued, voice steadying. "Your experts claim continuity of stroke width as proof of authenticity. But that continuity is the flaw. Real ink narrows with each stroke. Only mechanized pigment remains constant." A flush spread across the lead consultant's face. "Your Highness, this is inappropriate. She is a waitress." The sheikh didn't even look at him. "Let her finish." Her breath trembled, but her resolve did not. She placed one hand lightly on the back of a chair, grounding herself. "The document is too perfect," she said, "and perfection is not a characteristic of age. It is a characteristic of fabrication." A thin electric dread crawled through the room. Truth once spoken doesn't retreat. For a moment, no one breathed. It felt as if the entire suite, the chilled vault, the gold-leafed charter, the obsidian table, was holding itself still to hear what she would say next. The sheikh leaned forward, eyes sharp, posture altering by degrees. His confidence wasn't gone. It was recalibrating. She had seen scholars do that when confronted with unexpected brilliance. They didn't immediately believe, but they listened. The consultants, however, panicked. "Your Highness, she's misinterpreting basic calligraphy. She's staff. She lacks training. This is dangerous misinformation." Their voices built into a furious chorus. She waited. She let the storm burn itself out. Then she spoke again, and the room quieted, not by force, but by gravity. "Look at the vellum edges," she said, stepping closer to the refrigerated case. Authentic vellum curls slightly after exposure to fluctuating temperatures, but this sheet remains perfectly flat. The lead consultant scoffed. "Temperature-controlled storage?" "No," she interrupted gently. "Even under control, natural vellum carries memory. It resists uniformity. Synthetic pressure aging creates artificial compliance. That's what you're seeing." The sheikh's gaze drifted toward the edges of the document. His jaw tightened a fraction. She continued, more confident now. "The stitching marks are mathematically evenly spaced. No human hand, especially 3 centuries ago, would produce that level of symmetry. That precision belongs to industrial tools." A bead of sweat slid down one consultant's hairline. She moved to the projected scan on the wall. "Here, the pigment distribution in the main header. Your team claimed it was iron gall ink separation, but authentic iron gall fractures along pressure points. This pigment shows no fracturing at all. It's a metallic composite created to imitate the color, but not the decay." The younger consultant blurted, "This is outrageous." She raised her voice for the first time, not loud, but with unmistakable authority. "You will let me finish." The sheikh's expression flickered. Surprise, then something else. Respect? No, not yet. But the first shadow of it. She gestured toward the contract he had nearly signed. "And the clause at the bottom, the reversal clause, it shifts historical liability onto you, Your Highness. Meaning if the charter is proven altered, you're not only defrauded, you're responsible. Legally, financially, permanently." The sheikh inhaled sharply. A consultant stammered, "That clause is standard." "No," she said. "It's not. It's engineered, just like the charter." Silence swallowed the room whole. The sheikh slowly put down his pen. It rolled an inch across the table, the soft metal clinking like a verdict. She felt her heartbeat steady. She hadn't collapsed. She hadn't been thrown out. She had spoken. And the world had shifted. Sometimes the most dangerous truth is not the one people hide, but the one they refuse to see. The sheikh's pen stilled against the obsidian table, the faint metallic sound echoing like a fracture in the room's certainty. No one moved. The consultants stood suspended in a tableau of panic, faces tightened, breaths shallow, eyes darting between their employer and the woman they had dismissed as furniture. She stepped back slightly, giving space, allowing the weight of her words to settle. The sheikh was no fool. She could see that now. His silence wasn't indecision. It was assessment. He reached for the contract and held it up between his fingers, reading the clause she had mentioned. His eyes moved slowly, methodically, like a man dissecting a threat he had invited into the room. Finally, he spoke. "Explain the full consequence," he said quietly, "in plain terms." She inhaled. "If you sign, Your Highness, you become legally responsible for damages tied to the historical dispute. Even if the document is proven fraudulent later, the liability doesn't revert to the sellers. It stays with you. Permanently." She watched the realization hit him, a tightening around the eyes, a subtle shift in the jaw, a breath held too long. One of the consultants rushed forward, desperate. "This is a misunderstanding." The sheikh raised one hand. They fell silent instantly. He glanced at the charter, then back at her. "Continue." Her pulse steadied. She pointed to the exposed vellum, careful not to touch. The structure of the script changes at the midline. "Here." She indicated a curve in the lettering. The angle aligns with digital calligraphic tools. 18th century quills produced irregular tapering because ink flow reduced with each stroke. But this pigment maintains constant density. The lead consultant snapped. "Your Highness, she is misinformed. The charter underwent restoration." "Restoration does not create symmetry," she replied calmly. "It preserves asymmetry." Another consultant's voice cracked. "Your Highness, this woman, she is interfering with a multi-million-dollar negotiation." The sheikh turned to him, expression cold. "A negotiation built on deception is not a negotiation." Silence crashed over the room. She stepped closer to the projected scans. "Look at the top margin. Too wide. Scribes of that period conserved vellum because it was costly to produce. This margin reflects modern cutting techniques, lasers straight, frictionless." No one argued now. She moved to the final point. "And the seal. Your team claimed natural oxidation. But oxidation produces ultraviolet scattering, inconsistent with this hue. The metallic shimmer you see is from a contemporary compound, designed to mimic age but not endure it." The sheikh exhaled slowly. It wasn't anger, it was betrayal. He stared at the charter with a kind of wounded clarity, as if seeing a trusted friend reveal a hidden knife. In every scheme, the most dangerous lies are the ones wrapped in beautiful craftsmanship. The room's elegance began to feel like theater. Glossy surfaces, velvet shadows, curated luxury. None of it strong enough to contain the truth, now trembling in the air. The consultants looked hollow, drained of certainty, like actors caught mid-scene without their lines. The sheikh remained motionless, except for the slow tightening of his grip on the contract. He finally lowered the page and set it on the table with careful precision, as if touching something poisonous. "Who prepared this document?" His voice was soft, but it carried the gravity of a collapsing star. The lead consultant swallowed. Your Highness, it was provided by..." The sheikh cut him off with a single glance. Then he turned to her. "You saw all this from the corner of the room." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation wrapped in awe. She hesitated, sensing the weight behind his words. "I have studied similar manuscripts, Your Highness. Before." She paused, ashamed to reveal the rest. "Before my life changed." His eyes softened just slightly, an almost imperceptible shift, but enough to make the consultants flinch. They were losing control of the narrative, and they knew it. He extended a hand toward the charter. "Show me the primary flaw." She approached the table slowly, reverently, as though stepping back into a life she once loved. She stopped just short of the refrigerated case. "Here," she said, pointing to the main header. The word for boundary is written with a ligature that didn't exist in the scribe's era. It was introduced after revisions in regional decrees a century later. Whoever forged this assumed the evolution of the term applied retroactively. It does not. The sheikh leaned closer, his breath steadied. She continued. And here, the baseline drift. Authentic documents show slight elevation after extended strokes because the scribe's wrist fatigued. But this one remains perfectly level. The younger consultant shook his head violently. She's making unfounded claims. Your Highness, we vetted this through 4 separate institutions. Then all 4 failed, she said quietly. The sheikh's gaze snapped to the young consultant. Did they fail? Or did you pay them to succeed? The color drained from the consultant's face. The truth was no longer a theory. It was a spotlight. She stepped back. There is one final indicator. The room seemed to lean toward her. The ink bleed. She pointed again. Look closely. Natural vellum absorbs pigment inconsistently, but the absorption here is smooth, controlled, and uniform. That happens only when the surface is chemically treated, meaning this document wasn't preserved. Her voice hardened. It was manufactured. The sheikh's hand curled into a fist. The betrayal radiating from him was almost physical. Fraud reveals itself not through what is added, but through what refuses to age. The air in the suite thickened, the kind of heaviness that descends moments before a confession or an explosion. The consultants stood rigid, trapped between arrogance and panic. She felt none of their panic, only the strange calm of someone who had spent years swallowing truths and was finally letting one out. The sheikh stared at the charter as though it had personally humiliated him. In a sense, it had. Men of his stature were not accustomed to being fooled. The humiliation wasn't just financial, it was existential. He took a slow, pained breath. "Show me," he said. Not irritation, not disbelief. A request made by a man choosing clarity over pride. So she did. She approached the refrigerated case again, her shadow stretching across the table under the pendant lights. Her fingers hovered just above the glass. "Look at the gilded edges," she began. "The gold leaf is too stable." 3-century-old leaf oxidizes irregularly, but this one glows as if freshly applied. The lead consultant snapped, voice cracking. "Gold refracts under certain—" "It refracts," she interrupted, "but it does not glisten with modern adhesive compounds. They fluoresce differently." The sheikh turned his gaze sharply to the consultant. For the first time, fear bloomed in the man's eyes. She moved to the projected magnification. Here, the microscopic inconsistencies. They're algorithmic repetition patterns. A machine trying to imitate tension, not a hand expressing it. The room pulsed with silence. Finally, she stepped back. "There's more." The sheikh exhaled through his nose, bracing himself. "The linguistic cadence," she said, "the rhythm of the script. Scribes of that period followed oral recitation patterns when drafting legal documents. Their writing breathed with the cadence of spoken language. But this charter's rhythm is mechanical, digitally spaced, not humanly paced." She paused. "It is the signature of a modern forger familiar with historical vocabulary, but not with historical breath." Those words landed like a stone. The consultants erupted again, but their protestations were brittle now, shattering on contact with the sheikh's hardening expression. He raised his hand. Again, silence. "You," he said, looking at her as if she were the only coherent person in the room. "What would have happened if I signed this?" Her voice was steady. "The opposing families would contest the charter, it would be examined, it would collapse. And because of the liability clause, every loss, political, financial, reputational, would fall on you, even the damages tied to the land's disputed history." He nodded once, slowly. a man imagining the ruins of his future. She saw the truth dawn in him, heavy and devastating. The trap wasn't the charter. The trap was the belief that wealth inoculates one from deception. In every fragile structure of lies, the first crack is always denial. The sheikh straightened, the subtle adjustment of a man reclaiming control after standing too close to humiliation. His advisors watched him anxiously, each one calculating whether their careers could survive the next few minutes. The charter lay exposed inside the glass case, no longer a treasure, now a weapon someone had placed in his hand. He turned to her. "You said there is more?" She nodded. "Yes, Your Highness. The document's provenance trail." A tremor of dread passed through the consultants. The provenance was the backbone of their presentation, the polished story tying the charter to 3 centuries of rightful ownership. She stepped toward the digital projection. "You claimed the document passed through the Al-Ramadi estate archives in the early 1800s, but the referenced inventory number, AR 1842, doesn't correspond to land charters." The younger consultant's face drained. "How would you know that?" She didn't look at him. "Because the Al-Ramadi estate's 19th century inventory was part of my doctoral research. That catalogue number belongs to maritime decrees, nothing to do with land boundaries." A suffocating stillness filled the room. She clicked the next scan. "This page you cited as a reference copy, it's not from the 1800s. The parchment fibers are from a species of goat first bred in the 20th century. The reference is fake." The sheikh's jaw clenched. "So the provenance is fabricated?" "Not entirely," she said. "That's the genius of it. They intertwined authentic fragments of history with engineered ones. Enough truth to create comfort, enough invention to hide the trap." The lead consultant's voice shook now, stripped of its earlier confidence. "Your Highness, she is distorting—" She turned to him, voice cool and soft. "You knew, or you chose not to know." The man flinched. She continued. "Even the storage marks, the supposed smoke damage from the estate fire of 1911, are inconsistent. The pattern you displayed was generated with a heat stencil. Natural smoke disperses unpredictably. This pattern is uniform." She looked at the sheikh. "Everything you were shown tonight was engineered to feel inevitable." The sheikh leaned back slowly, hands clasped in front of him. He studied each consultant, and for the first time, they shrank beneath his stare. He asked quietly, "Why would someone construct a fraud of this scale?" She hesitated only a moment. "Because a well-crafted lie around a historical document is more valuable than truth, and because those who sell fraud rely on men too powerful to imagine they can be deceived." The sheikh's gaze flicked to the contract again, the clause she exposed now glowing like a warning. The room felt colder, sharper, more honest. Power fears deception only when deception is undeniable. The sheikh's silence grew heavier than the refrigerated air drifting from the vault. His advisors stood rigid, terrified of the moment his rage would ignite. But the sheikh didn't rage. Not yet. He looked like a man excavating the truth, layer by layer, deciding which parts of his world to burn. He turned to her again. "Who benefits," he asked quietly, "from me believing this charter is real?" She drew in a slow breath. This was the question that mattered. "The sellers, of course," she said. "But not only them." Her gaze moved to the consultants, one by one. "There are intermediaries who profit from the transaction itself. If you signed, their commission, legitimate or not, would be immediate. Even if the charter collapsed later, they'd walk away untouched." The consultants stiffened as if she had read their private contracts aloud. She pointed to the liability clause on the document. "And the party who inserted this clause benefits most. They would shift generational losses onto you. When the charter is exposed, the legal and financial burden becomes yours alone. The sheikh's eyes narrowed, not in anger, analysis. He was following the path she laid. So the trap was not in the artifact, he murmured. It was in the paperwork attached to it. She nodded. The charter is bait. The clause is the blade. A faint tremor crossed the youngest consultant's jaw. It was small, but noticeable. Her eyes sharpened. Your Highness, may I see the contract folder again? The sheikh immediately handed it to her. She scanned the pages, her pulse steady despite the room waiting on her every blink. One page caught her attention. A supplementary indemnity sheet tucked between two standard forms, plain, unmarked, nearly invisible unless one knew to look. This, she said softly, lifting it. This isn't hotel stationery. It's been inserted. The consultants erupted. Too fast, too loud. That page is part of the legal package. It was reviewed by counsel. You're misinterpreting. But the sheikh's voice cut through them like ice. Let her speak. She placed the page on the table. The typeface matches a firm known for structuring cross-liability traps. Their hallmark is this phrasing. She pointed. Burden of continuity. It reverses the burden of proof, meaning, if someone accuses you of forging the charter, you must prove you didn't, even if the forgery was committed by someone else. The sheikh's breath left him in a slow, stunned exhale. That clause, she continued, ensures that even innocence becomes expensive. The consultants were pale now, every trace of earlier authority drained. She stepped back, hands clasped. Your Highness, this negotiation was designed so that you lose even in victory. The sheikh stared at the forged charter as though it were a living thing, something venomous he had almost embraced. Sometimes the deadliest traps are the ones written in beautiful language. For the first time that night, the sheikh pushed his chair back. The sound, metal against marble, cut through the suite like a verdict. He rose slowly, not with fury, but with a composure more dangerous than rage. Every consultant stiffened. None dared breathe. He walked toward the refrigerated case and stood before the charter, his reflection faintly visible in the glass. The gold leaf shimmered innocently, pretending to be history, pretending to be truth. He lifted a hand as though testing the distance between himself and the lie he had nearly welcomed into his lineage. Without looking away, he spoke. You, he said to her, saw through all of this, alone, from the corner of a room. Her throat tightened. He turned. No, tell me how. She hesitated. The truth of her past wasn't something she planned to reveal tonight, but the room waited, and she no longer felt invisible. I studied paleography, she said softly. Historical linguistics, manuscript forensics, before I had to leave my program. She lowered her gaze. I didn't finish. I didn't have the resources. A flicker of something heavy passed through his expression. Recognition, maybe. A man born into wealth, hearing the quiet biography of someone who never had it. One consultant seized the moment. Your Highness, she is exaggerating her expertise. The sheikh cut him off sharply. Enough. He stepped closer to her. Not imposing, not threatening, simply present. You carried all this knowledge and no one in this room noticed. It wasn't praise, it was indictment. The consultants shifted uncomfortably, their polished confidence collapsing into fragments. One attempted a final defense. Your Highness, we followed procedure. Any irregularities were unintentional. She spoke before she could stop herself. Irregularities require intent. The consultant paled. The sheikh's voice lowered to a tone colder than the refrigerated vault. Did you know this charter was false? They froze. A war of micro-expressions rippled through them. One of the men looked at the floor. Another blinked too hard. The youngest swallowed. The lead consultant's hands trembled. She watched them with the detachment of someone who had survived enough humiliation to recognize guilt when it tried to disguise itself as shock. Finally, the sheikh dismissed them with a gesture. Not loud, not dramatic. A simple lift of his hand, but it struck them like a sentence. "Leave," he said. They hesitated. "Now!" The consultants fled in a silent panic, their careers unraveling behind them like threads snapping in the dark. When the door closed, the suite felt cavernous. Quiet. Awaiting truth. The sheikh faced her again, his voice no longer sharp, but heavy with what he now understood. "Tell me," he said. "Why did you speak? You had nothing to gain." She met his gaze, steady. "Because silence would have destroyed you. And because I've lived my whole life watching truth lose to people who talk louder. Some rooms only shift when someone refuses to disappear." The suite felt different now, emptied of pretense, stripped of performance. Without the consultants, the room no longer vibrated with curated confidence. It breathed. It listened. The refrigerated vault hummed quietly behind the glass, illuminating the false charter like a confession. The sheikh stood before her, not as a billionaire, not as a sovereign heir, but as a man confronting the enormity of what almost happened. "You saved me from a disaster worth more than land or money," he said quietly. "Tell me what you want in return." The question jolted her. Want? She hadn't allowed herself to want anything in years. Her voice stayed measured. "I want nothing, Your Highness. I only did what was right." A faint smile ghosted across his features, an expression shaped less by amusement and more by respect. "You know," he said, "most people who stop a $240 million fraud expect compensation." She shook her head. "Compensation changes outcomes, not intentions. I needed my intention to remain clean." He studied her, truly studied her. The quiet posture, the restraint, the shadows of exhaustion beneath her eyes, the dignity clinging to her despite a life that had stripped so much away. "You were invisible when you walked into this room," he murmured. "But I see you now." The words unsettled her more than any threat could have. Being seen had consequences. Visibility meant exposure. Vulnerability, risk. She felt her ribs tighten. He sensed her discomfort and softened his tone. "Not in the way you fear," he added. "I mean, your mind deserves a place where it is used, not hidden." She swallowed, unsure how to hold the weight of that sentence. He took a slow step toward the table, retrieving the contract folder, the one she had pulled apart piece by piece. "I have a forensic division within my Heritage Foundation," he said. "They authenticate manuscripts, illuminate fraud, protect historical archives. Brilliant minds work there, but none saw what you saw tonight." Her breath caught. He placed the folder on the table and met her gaze. "I want you to join them." The words hit her with quiet force. She thought of her nearly finished doctoral research. The archive nights spent alone. The manuscripts she loved more than her own future. The scholarship lost. The debt. The life spent shrinking to survive. "Your Highness, I don't have credentials anymore." He shook his head. "You have something rarer than credentials." A pause. Integrity. Her vision blurred. For a half a heartbeat. Not tears. Just the shock of hearing a word she hadn't felt associated with her in years. He glanced back at the charter. A room full of experts failed. Only you refused to surrender to the performance. She exhaled slowly, the weight in her chest softening. Sometimes the world changes the moment someone realizes you were never small. You were simply standing in the wrong rooms. 1 year later, she passed through the frost-lit halls of the Heritage Forensics Institute with a badge clipped to her coat and a steady calm she had never known before. Her name, once buried under debt and invisibility, now appeared on research memos, archival reports, and restoration proposals. She worked in a small office, the kind with quiet lamps and stacks of vellum samples, exactly the life she once believed she had lost forever. The sheikh visited only twice that year, each time briefly, always respectfully. He never treated her like someone who owed him anything, only like someone whose clarity had saved him. She learned to breathe without fear. She learned to speak without shrinking. She learned that brilliance does not disappear just because the world looks away. Some evenings, when the institute was nearly empty, she stood alone in the analysis room, watching aged manuscripts unfold under ultraviolet light. She traced the fractures, the irregularities, the stories etched into every imperfection, proof that authenticity isn't about perfection at all. It's about endurance. As she packed her bag, one night, she paused by the glass door and looked back at the quiet room that had become her sanctuary. A life rebuilt not by luck, but by the one moment she chose not to stay silent. Sometimes the smallest voice is the one that rewrites everything.